Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Phyrexia All Will Be One spoilers. And today, wow, do we have some exciting stuff to talk about. We have the return of Atraxa, showing off a brand new card type in Magic that we don't even know what it is. We got the return of the sword cycle. So many sweet cards, which means we should probably jump right into it. Start talking Phyrexia All Will Be One. Before we do, two quick reminders. Number one, to keep up on all the latest spoilers throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Number two, if you need some Phyrexia All Will Be One cards, you can snag them from our awesome sponsor, Card Kingdom, over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. And even get a free goldfish sticker. Just let them know you want one in your order notes, and they'll be happy to hook you up. Anyway, let's talk more awesomeness from Phyrexia All Will Be One. So first off today, we have the return of Atraxa as Atraxa Grand Unifier. And I gotta say, this card manages to do something that's pretty impressive. Somehow, this card is one of the boringest cards in the entire set, but also perhaps the most important card in the entire set. So Atraxa Grand Unifier, it's 7 mana, same colors as the old one, every color but red. You get a 7/7 legendary Phyrexian Angel with Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, and Lifelink, same mechanics as the original Atraxa, and then its ability is when it enters the battlefield, you reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each card type, you can put a card of that type from the reveal cards into your hand, put the rest on the bottom. The card types, a little reminder here, artifacts, creatures, enchantments, instants, lands, planeswalkers, sorceries, also tribal, which isn't on the reminder text anymore, and battle. And that word battle is what makes this card so incredibly important. So on one hand, Atraxa, it's just kind of a generic 4-color good stuff commander, which I kind of hate these style of commanders. It's like Kenrith, like 4-color Kenrith. It doesn't push in any specific direction. It's just like, play magic cards and I'm going to be really powerful regardless of what you're playing. On the other hand, this is the previewing of a new card type that is probably coming to Magic in March of the Machines. We knew there was going to be some big shakeup with things changing in March of the Machines, the next set after Phyrexia, and it seems like this battle card type is probably a huge part of that. We don't really know what battle is. A kind of funny little history lesson here. 15 years ago, when Wizards first revealed Tarmogoyf, Tarmogoyf had a similar reminder text because it also cares about card types in the graveyard. In Tarmogoyf's reminder text was the word Planeswalker for the first time. When Tarmogoyf was previewed, we didn't know what Planeswalkers were. We didn't even know that they would be a thing. And then Tarmogoyf just had this word Planeswalker, and everyone's like, what's a Planeswalker? And then we found out a few sets later what Planeswalkers were, and they changed the game forever, and now became probably the most important card type in the entire game of Magic. Atraxa is a nice little callback to that, revealing this new card type battle, even though we have no idea what it is. So get your speculation going. My guess, and this is just 100% a shot in the dark, I'm probably super duper wrong, I think it's something that's going to impact the entire battlefield. Something like, if you've ever played Marvel Snap, I know we've talked about that a lot lately. If you've ever played Marvel Snap, it's got these different lanes, and each lane has a weird effect that changes how the game is played. Something like, whatever, you can't play cards here this turn, or stuff gets more power, ETBs trigger multiple times, stuff like that. I wonder if we could have something similar to that in Magic. Some sort of like static effect that's actually going to take and change how the battlefield is laid out, how it's played, what your cards do. At the same time, because it's a card type, it seems likely that this is a real card that's going to go in your library, going to end up in your graveyard, because if it doesn't go in your library, how's Atraxa going to grab it? So it seems like it's going to play like a real card. Other speculation, it's like world enchantments, which are kind of similar enchantments that impact how the entire game is played for both players, but you can only have one of them. So I don't know. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what this battle card type is. If you got guesses, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, we'll probably find out in a couple of months when we get to March of the Machines. So Atraxa itself, same colors as original Atraxa, although as I mentioned before, it's just kind of a generic good stuff card. Other than like, play a mixture of card types, Atraxa Grand Unifier doesn't really ask you to do anything, at least old Atraxa, even though it is just a very powerful standalone card, it cared about proliferating. So if you're going to build an Atraxa deck, you want something that has to do with counters. You can be Planeswalkers, +1/+1 counters, -1/-1 counters, unique counters, you name it, what charge counters. Atraxa can work with all of those, but at least it pushes you in a direction. Atraxa Grand Unifier, it's just kind of a big value play. It reminds me a little bit of like Tishana or Prime Speaker or Zagana, where it's like, here's this big top-end threat that when you play it, you're going to draw 3 cards, 4 cards, 5 cards. I guess in the dream world, you could draw up to 9 cards if you had every single type and they all happen to be in your top 10. That's super unlikely to actually happen, but you're going to draw some number of cards. Another really good comparison is like a more expensive but less restricted Niv Mizzet Reborn. Niv Mizzet Reborn cares specifically about multicolor cards, and then when it comes into play, you get to grab a card of each multicolor pairing from your top 10. Atraxa is similar. You gotta pay more mana for it. It's 7 mana compared to 5, but you get an upside here. Rather than having to be specifically a 2-color multicolor deck, Atraxa, all it really cares about is card types. So if you build an Atraxa deck, all you really want to do is try to have a mixture of creatures and enchantments and artifacts and and sorceries and planeswalkers and lands. If you want to go really deep, you can add tribal into the mix. I know tribal isn't in the reminder text, and I've seen people freaking out about this. Like, where's tribal? Is battle actually tribal? Are we getting rid of tribal? Tribal hasn't been in the reminder text of cards like this for like 7 years or something now. The problem is, yeah, tribal still exists as far as we know. There's nothing that's taken away the tribal card type. The problem is, it's confusing to new players. So if you have a card like Atraxa and it says tribal, and we haven't had a new tribal card since, I don't even know, Lorwyn 15 years ago or something, a new player isn't going to know what that is. When they hear tribal, they probably think of their lord for their cat deck or something. Like, that tribal decks is probably the thing. So you could see people trying to grab a Lord of Atlantis or something with their Atraxa, thinking that's what tribal meant. So tribal, it still works. It's just not really relevant to put into the reminder text because it's so unlikely that anyone's going to actually have to deal with a tribal card with Atraxa. But if you do have a tribal card in your deck, it is still one of the card types as far as we know. Unless there's a rules change that hasn't been announced yet, it still exists. It's still a type. You can still get your Bitter Blossom and count it as a tribal card. As far as standard play, it'll be interesting to see how good this is. It can generate a lot of card advantage. On the other hand, we have some really powerful stuff that's kind of in the same range and doesn't have the 4-color mana cost. Cityscape Leveler, 1 more mana. Titan of Industry, Tyrannix Rex, both same mana value, but you only need green mana rather than 4 colors of mana. Atraxa certainly comes down and refuels and adds just this huge lifelinking body that, unless your opponent can kill it, it's going to stabilize Baneslayer Angel style and just win you the game. So I think Atraxa probably has a role, but there's only going to be certain decks in standard that can play it. My guess is the 2 homes I'm most excited for. Number 1, some sort of like 5-color Elish Norn Panharmonicon style deck. Atraxa in that deck, wow, are you going to draw a lot of cards. If you can Elish Norn into Atraxa, good lord, are you going to refill your hand. The other place where it's very interesting is in the Kami War deck. We've played this deck a couple of times. It's a full-on 5-color deck. It naturally has a mixture of card types because you got Sagas, which are enchantments. You usually play like Courier's Briefcase as an artifact, so you naturally have a pretty good mix of card types. Atraxa could be a cool top-end card in that deck as well. So I think those are the places you're looking for. As far as Commander, like I said, I mean, it's going to see play because we just don't have 4-color commanders. I believe this is only the second non-red 4-color commander that we have outside of original Atraxa. So I think that this Atraxa will be a pretty popular commander card just because there aren't other options. Like, you can play partner pairings, but outside of that, it's one of the Atraxas if you want to play this 4-color pairing. On the other hand, like I said before, the card actually kind of bores me. Like, I love drawing cards. It's a fine value card. It's a powerful card. It's going to let you dump your hand and then refuel and dump your hand and refuel. So it's not that it's a bad card. It's super powerful. I don't know. I kind of don't like generic good stuff commanders anymore. I'd rather have my commanders push me in a direction like old Atraxa, even if it's a light push, like play things that care about counters, rather than just like, hey, I'm a really powerful thing that's going to draw you a bunch of cards when I come into play. So Atraxa Grand Unifier, I think this is probably a fringe card for specific decks in Standard, probably very popular in Commander just because there aren't a lot of other options, and it is really powerful, refilling your hand with its ETB trigger. But the big takeaway is, what's battle? What is this battle card type that's coming to change the game of Magic? Again, if you got guesses, let me know in the comments. We also got the return of maybe the most iconic cycle of cards to come from Mirrodin/New Phyrexia, which is the 9th member of the Sword cycle. So we're only missing 2. Heading into Phyrexia will be 1. We needed the Gruul Sword in the Dimir Sword. Well, we got the Gruul one in Sword of Forge in Frontier. Like all the swords in the cycle, 3 to cast, 2 to equip, gives the equipped creature +2/+2, has protection from red and green, which is kind of a reasonable protection color. Red's a pretty heavy removal color, so the protection helps there. Green is often the big creature on the battlefield color, so being able to swing past green creatures is actually a nice little upside. And then it says, when an equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn, and you may play an additional land this turn. I will say, this sword is way more powerful than I expected. I had predicted a while ago that we'd see more of the swords returning in Phyrexia. I figured they'd be very kind of watered down. The ones we got in Modern Horizons were actually like kind of weak, and this is a standard set, so I assumed the sword was going to be pretty bad. This actually greatly exceeded my expectations for a standard legal sword. If you look at the abilities, it's essentially Reckless Impulse. You do have to use the cards the turn that you hit with sword, not the next turn, but essentially you draw 2 cards that you can use this turn, and then you get an extra land drop, Azusa's Many Journey Styles, which if you add that all together, it's like kind of a repeatable growth spiral. Not quite an Escape to the Wilds, but almost. You don't draw as many cards, but the ability to draw some cards and make an extra land drop, and you can make that land drop from the cards you exile, that is really, really powerful. So how good is this sword going to actually be in 60 card formats? And that's a really good question. So on one hand, every single time we've been to Mirrodin/Phyrexia, the swords have seen play, like Sword of Fire and Ice, back in the OG Mirrodin run. Then we had sort of Feast and Famine, so Lord of War and Peace be really good during Callblade era, although there was Stoneforge Mystic, which made it even better. So historically, swords have been good every time they've been in Standard. However, is this sword going to be good in Standard? I think the question is, are swords in general good anymore, or are they just too slow? I think the question is going to come down to, is there enough support? And I think there might be. Remember, in the past when swords were good, it was because of stuff like Stoneforge Mystic tutoring them out. In Standard, we got Kemba, works really well with equipments. We got like Aster, we got Jor Kadeen. There's probably some more stuff in Phyrexia that we haven't seen yet. None of this is Stoneforge Mystic, but these are powerful payoffs for filling your deck with equipment, and Sword of Forge and Frontier is a pretty powerful equipment, so I think people will try it in Standard, and I think there's a chance it succeeds, like repeatable growth spiral or repeatable mini Escape to the Wilds. That is a very strong effect if you can get it going, although there is a legit question as to if swords are just too slow in 2023. I think in older formats, that's definitely true. Like the very best of the sword cycle, Sword of Fire and Ice, Sword of Light and Shadow, Sword of Feast and Famine, they don't even see play in formats like Modern anymore. They're just too slow. 3 to cast, 2 to equip, your thing dies, you gotta equip again. So that is kind of the challenge, is if this entire archetype of cards is just too slow for Modern Magic. Where this sword will undoubtedly shine, though, is in Commander. Honestly, if you want to, I don't even know if this is a hot take, but this might be the single best sword in Commander, because if you think about Commander, we've talked about this many times. What do you want in Commander more than anything? You want mana and you want cards. You want mana and you want cards. That is how you win a game of Commander. That's how you do the cool thing you're trying to do in a game of Commander, is having lots of mana and having lots of card. Sword of Forge and Frontier offers exactly that. You're like, every time you hit, you're kind of getting a Muldrifter/Rampant Growth, which is absurd. And in Commander, pro green is pretty relevant because green is the most popular color. Like, it's not going to save you from that much removal, but it is going to let you swing through creatures on the battlefield. So I think that Sword of Forge and Frontier is probably the best sword in Commander. Right now, the best sword in Commander is Sword of Hearth and Home, just because it searches for a basic land when you hit your opponent. This is the most played sword in the format. I think that Sword of Forge and Frontier basically trumps Sword of Hearth and Home, and I think this will be the most played sword in the Commander format because you're doing the good thing that Sword of Hearth and Home does, which is getting an extra land on the battlefield, but you're also drawing cards, which in most decks is going to be better than blinking one of your own creatures. So Sword of Forge and Frontier, going to be really interesting to see how this shakes out in Standard. I think this is undoubtedly a Commander All-Star, play it in your equipment decks. It's going to be absolutely amazing in pretty much any equipment-based commander deck. In Standard, I think it has potential to be good. Its abilities are way better than I expected, but I do have a little question as to whether swords in general are good anymore. Can equipment like this work in Modern Magic, or is Modern Magic just too fast for a 3 to cast, 2 to equip equipment, no matter how powerful it is, to actually be competitive in 60 card formats? So we'll have to wait and see, but I am super hyped to see the swords coming back, and there's probably a good chance we get the last member of the cycle next set in March of the Machines with the Dimir sword to just finish off the full 10 card cycle. We also got another big green beater in a Valve Spinoderm. So 4 mana 5/5, pretty above the curve. It's a Phyrexian beast. It enters the battlefield with 4 oil counters. It has trample as long as it has 2 or fewer oil counters on it. Otherwise, it has hexproof. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you gotta remove an oil counter from it. And then if it has no oil counters on it, sacrifice it. So a Valve Spinoderm is essentially a callback to Blastoderm. It works kind of the same way as a 4 mana 5/5 that's only going to stick out for a few turns before you lose all the counters and it disappears forever. A Valve Spinoderm, definitely a very upgraded version. Like, when you play it, it's going to have hexproof for at least 2 turns, and then as the oil counters remove, it's going to gain trample. This is one of the most competitively costed hexproof cards we've seen in quite a while. So the question's going to be, is it worth playing this over cards that stick around forever, or stick around until they die? The main competition right now in the 4-drop slot in green is like Uvenwald Oddity, pretty good card, 4/4 Trample Haster, Howlpack Piper I see on occasion for some reason. So the question's going to be, is it worth playing in a Valve Spinoderm, which is bigger and in some ways better than these cards, but comes with a short time span, a short lifespan before it's going to die to its oil counters being removed? Or would you rather play an Oddity or a Piper or something? And I think the answer is, it depends. I think the idea of Valve Spinoderm is it's for a very specific deck. I don't think, well, maybe I would still just play this in a generic green deck, honestly. Like, I don't know if it beats out Uvenwald Oddity, but is a second 4-drop and just like mono green stompy, I think it's fine. Because if you think about mono green, hopefully you're just going to have your opponent dead before the 4 counters are gone anyway. But I think what this is designed for is for a proliferate deck. And we've seen a bit of this even in mono green with like Bloated Contaminator. We also got like Azuri and Varaska. The Monumental Facade adds oil counters to things. In a deck that can proliferate pretty consistently, you can keep your Valve Spinoderm around forever. Like, every time you hit with your Bloated Contaminator, you're going to add another oil counter to your Valve Spinoderm, which is going to keep it hexproof. It's going to keep it on the battlefield. So I think that's the idea. If you're a proliferate deck, this suddenly becomes very exciting because we don't get hexproof creatures that are priced like a Valve Spinoderm anymore. Every time a new set comes out, I'm always like scraping around trying to find a hexproof creature to throw auras on, and we got some good auras like Blanchwood Armor, Audacity. You can easily build a Valve Spinoderm into like a 10/10 hexproof trampling threat with these cards, but we just don't get cheap hexproofers. So I'm actually pretty intrigued by this having hexproof, and the idea of playing it with like Bloated Contaminator or Varaska to keep it around long enough to smash the opponent to death with these auras also works really well with sort of Forge and Frontier, other equipment when it's in hexproof mode. So I think that this card is better than it looks. At first glance, you're like, I don't know. Do I want to play a threat that's going to fade away? Well, Blastoderm was legit back in its day, and that faded away. This is even better than that. Plus, we have shenanigans for keeping it around, proliferate, adding oil counters. So I actually think a Valve Spinoderm has a chance to be a pretty good card in specific decks in Standard. We also got one of my favorite arts from the set. The art from the set is just so epic and awe-inspiring. Monument to Perfection. So Monument, 2-mana artifact. You can pay 3, search your library for a basic, a sphere, or a locust land, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle. Then you can pay 3, turn it into a 9/9 Phyrexian construct artifact creature. It loses all abilities, but it gains indestructible Intoxic 9. But you can only activate this if there are 9 or more lands with different names among basic, sphere, and locust lands you control. So Monument of Perfection, this card is very interesting. On level 1, it's a new take on Journeyer's Guide, or Thematic Compass. We've seen the same exact card several times before. 2 to cast, 3 to tutor a land into your hand. The upside of Monument of Perfection is, along with grabbing basic lands, you can grab spheres and locust lands. Just how relevant that is, I don't know. So in standard right now, we have basics, of course, 5 basics. Then we've seen 2 sphere lands, the Seed Core and the Monumental Facade. Right now, we don't have any Locust lands. There's Glimmer Post in Modern. There's Cloud Post, which is banned in Modern, but legal in Legacy. I assume we're probably getting a Locust land in the set. We'll see how good it is. If they actually like reprinted Cloud Post or something in standard, my god, this card would go from pretty questionable against the odds card to like super busted. So right now, there's not a ton of options here. Like, if you actually think about it, we don't actually have enough spheres or locuses to even turn this on in standard. 5 basics, 2 spheres, no locuses. That means we can't even get to 9 different basics, locuses, and spheres on the battlefield in standard. So I assume we're getting more spheres and probably at least 1 locust. So we'll have to wait and see. So there is some upside to being able to get these non-basic lands. None of them are like super busted, but it is a nice little upside. If we can actually turn this on, it's kind of absurd. It is the closest thing we've seen from Phyrexia All Will Be One to a Blightsteel Colossus. Doesn't get trampled, but a 9/9 Indestructible Toxic 9, that is a legit threat that's going to close out the game super quickly. The question is this a Field of Dead or 9 Fingers Keen? I'm leaning more towards 9 Fingers Keen. Field of the Dead, it's pretty easy to turn on because all it cares about is 7 lands with different names. So this means all of your dual lands are turning on Field of the Dead. You play a tropical island or a breeding pool, and that's counting as a different land. So it's very easy to build a mana base to turn on Field of the Dead. That's something we learned, and it ended up being banned in standard. On the other hand, one of my criticisms of 9 Finger Keen is to actually turn it on and get 9 gates on the battlefield. You pretty much have to get like literally every single gate in its colors on the battlefield. Monument of Perfection kind of feels like that. Like I said, right now in standard, we literally don't have enough lands of the types Monument cares about to even turn it into a creature. I'm sure that are changed. There's no way Wizards would print this card and not give us enough lands to turn it on, but you're really going to have probably like 9 out of 10 lands that meet its criteria, which is a pretty big ask. So that makes me think this is probably against the odds card. Even in Commander, like, yes, you can tutor up lands and turn it on, but then it dies to an exile-based removal spell anyway. So I think this is more of an against the odds card. Although, if you wanted against the odds in standard, we do have a couple of cards that work really well with it. Like, Keiru can tutor up any land and put them in your hand. Titania can tutor 2 lands, any land directly to the battlefield. So I think that's the direction I'd probably go building around this. The other thing about this card is the first mode, I just don't think it's good enough anymore. Like 2 to cast, 3 to tutor a land to your hand. Is anyone gonna play this over something like Reckoner Bankbuster? Maybe after rotation, like it is a source of card advantage. This card advantage is a land, but right now this just feels like slower, worse, makes you play a bunch of janky lands in your deck version of Reckoner Bankbuster, rather than Reckoner Bankbuster, which you can just jam in like a mono black deck with all swamps, and it's going to be absurd. One of the most played cards in standard. So Monument of Perfection, I love the art. I love the design of this card. A little bit of wait and see mode to see what other spheres and locust lands we get. That really is going to determine how good this card is. If there's like 5 locust lands and 10 spheres and some of them are busted, then this becomes a little bit more intriguing. For now, I think it's very much an against the odds card in every format, even all the way back to Commander. But if you do turn it on, kind of a hilarious way to win the game. We also got a new legendary Phyrexian Elephant Wizard, an Azorius card, Malcator Purity Overseer. So this card, I think it's actually pretty good. 3 mana for a 1/1 in the Azorius colors. When it enters the battlefield, you make a 3/3 colorless Phyrexian Golem artifact creature token, and then beginning your end step, if 3 or more artifacts enter the battlefield under your control, you make a 3/3 colorless Phyrexian Golem artifact creature token. So this is essentially a legendary Azorius Blade Splicer. Blade Splicer, it's still a pretty good card. Like, it doesn't see as much play in Modern as it used to. There was a time when this actually saw Modern play, but it's still pretty powerful. You get 4 power and toughness for 3 mana, then you get Shenanigans, where you can maybe blink it, or return it to your hand and replay it and get another 3/3. And Malcator actually has even more upside, because if somehow you get a bunch of artifacts coming into play, you get another 3/3 on your end step. So I think that Malcator, seems like a pretty playable card. Like I said, I think even just a Blade Splicer mode is good enough for standard. Like, playing this in a deck that can blink things, has ETB synergies, or even just a generic Azorius, like, tempo creature deck is gonna be fine. But then if you want to build around it, stuff like Moonsnare Prototype, Reckoner Bankbuster, and Licensors, these are playable cheap artifacts that can help you hit that last mode. If you can somehow play this and get the Golem, and also have 2 more artifacts come into play that turn and get 2 Golems, then this is way above the curve for 3 mana. You're getting 7 power and toughness if you can pull that off, and maybe a free artifact like Moonsnare Prototype can make that happen. I think as far as where to play this, outside of the, the generic, just it's a good card, it's a Blade Splicer that you can play in any deck in its colors, gonna be especially good in Elish Norn Mother of the Machines, where you double up its trigger. Blade Splicer, really good Panharmonicon style card. Also kind of intriguing with Encroaching Mycosynth. If all your stuff are artifacts, then Malcator is an artifact, which means playing it is going to be 2 artifacts entering the battlefield, so you only need 1 more artifact, and all your things except for lands are artifacts coming into play to hit that last Golem, the end step Golem. So I don't know, probably wouldn't be competitive, but that is kind of a funny jank way to play this, and it is a cool thing to do with Encroaching Mycosynth. Another way to play this in older formats, maybe like Pioneer, Explorer, Historic, even Modern, is it is a wizard, and it does have a very nice ETB trigger, so it works really well with Naban or Harmonic Prodigy. Like, if you can Naban on 2 into Malcator on 3, you double up the Golem, you're gonna do that 7 power and toughness across 3 body thing, which is pretty strong, and then Harmonic Prodigy actually would double the last trigger as well if somehow you meant that, so you could be making a lot of Golems in a wizard deck. As far as commander, I think as a commander, it's designed to be a Golem tribal commander. We have all these artificers, Master Splicer, Sensor Splicer, Wing Splicer, that make these 3/3 Golems when they come into play, but we don't really have a leader for that deck, so I think that's the design of this card, is if you want to jam all these old Phyrexia Splicer Golem makers together in a deck, Malcator is a perfect commander. Also, just a fine card for blink decks, where you keep blinking it to get more 3/3s, also Panharmonicon style decks. So Malcator, it's actually just a really good card. It's a Blade Splicer with a bunch of upside. I expect it's good enough for standard, at least in specific decks, and I would definitely play it in Blink and Panharmonicon decks in Historic Brawler Commander as well. Moving into the realm of lower rarity cards, there's one that I'm really hyped about, which is Gleeful Demolition. So Gleeful Demolition, 1 red mana, blow up an artifact. It's sorcery speed, so pretty efficient, not instant speed, but still 1 mana, blow up a Reckoner Bankbuster, a Portal to Phyrexia, not bad. And then it says, if you control that artifact, create 3 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens. So this is a big example of power creep. We have power crept Kadoltha Rebirth. Kadoltha Rebirth only blows up your own artifact and then makes 3 goblins for 1 mana at sorcery speed. Gleeful Demolition is Kadoltha Rebirth, except you can also snipe one of your opponent's artifacts if you need to. So the reason I'm hyped about this card is not so much blowing up my opponent's stuff, like that's kind of nice, but Kadoltha Rebirth is actually a really powerful effect in the right deck. 3 1/1s for a single mana is a really good deal, and we have some synergies for this, even in standard, like Experimental Synthesizer. It's the kind of artifact that you want to blow up. You're going to draw a card when you blow it up. So you can turn 1 Synthesizer, draw a card, or turn 2, whatever, and then just blow it up with Gleeful Demolition, get a bunch of goblins, and draw the card. So maybe some sort of Oni called Anvil deck. But what I'm mostly hyped about is I think this might bring back an old build of 8-Wack goblins in Modern. There was a build we played a long time ago of 8-Wack that was built around Kadoltha Rebirth, with the idea being you like play Memnite or Ornithopter and then sack it to Kadoltha Rebirth, and then you bushwhack and hit your opponent for a ton of damage. Now that we have 8 Kadoltha Rebirths with Gleeful Demolition joining the fray, this build becomes much more consistent, and the upside of this build is it's really, really fast. 8-Wack is a fast deck anyway, but this is way faster than other builds of 8-Wack because you're just putting so many 1/1 bodies on the battlefield so quickly, so definitely expect to revisit the Kadoltha Rebirth 8-Wack deck now that we have Gleeful Demolition as well. So Gleeful Demolition, card's actually really good. Don't sleep on this one. Fine artifact removal for your opponent, and potentially a build around in standard or especially in Modern where you're playing it alongside real Kadoltha Rebirth. We also got a bunch more Proliferate stuff. Gotta say, Proliferate has been costed really competitively in this set, way more so than past sets that had Proliferate. Unnatural Restoration, 2 mana, return a permanent from your graveyard to your hand, and Proliferate. Volt Charge, actually a reprint, 3 mana Lightning Bolt at instant speed plus Proliferate. Expand the Sphere, potentially 2 lands on the battlefield from the top of your deck, but if you whiff on lands, you get to Proliferate to equal the difference, which means you can just cast this for 4 mana, intentionally not put any lands into play and Proliferate twice, or you could get 1 land and Proliferate once, any combination of those things. Also interesting to see Wizards focusing more on this, put lands into play from the top of your library style of ramp rather than the search your library style ramp. I think the idea is to just speed up games of Commander in specific. Although the thing is, I don't think this plan's gonna work. The problem is we already have so many good search your library ramp cards that I don't think these new versions are gonna replace them. They're gonna have to be really powerful to beat out Nature's Lords and Cultivates and Kadama Reaches. So I don't think it's actually gonna have the impact that Wizards would like it to have, but it is an interesting new take on ramp, and it allows for some flexibility here with this fail to find land Proliferate instead plan. We also got a couple of good Toxic cards. Jawbone Duelist, 2 mana 1/1 double striker with Toxic 1, so hitting for 2 poison counters a turn, but 2 mana 1/1 double strike, that's actually a fairly costed card. And then you get the upside of Toxicking. Same with Billowas Skull Dweller, just a 1 mana 1/1 death touch, an archetype that we've actually seen be pretty playable because this takes down any creature on your opponent's side of the battlefield in combat, plus it has Toxic 1. So kind of like Proliferate, we were just talking about how Proliferate is kind of just being tacked on to already playable cards. Toxic is more or less the same. Like, these are already solid uncommons, even without Toxic. And then with Toxic, you get the bonus that you can play them in a Toxic deck, turn on various mechanics like Corrupted, so pretty powerful. Otherwise, a bunch of stuff that's probably mostly for limited, but you can check it all out over at mtgpreviews.com. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Phyrexia All Will Be One spoilers for today. So what do you think? What do you think about new Atraxa? What is a battle? Do you have any guesses? Let me know in the comments. What about the new sword? That one hugely exceeded my expectations. How good is it? Can it actually show up in standard, or a sword's just not good anymore? How great will it be in Commander? All the other stuff, let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll be back tomorrow with more daily Phyrexia All Will Be One spoilers. So until then, have a great day, and I will talk to you soon.